Hello, everyone. ITMO stands for Instant Transformation Moment. And the reason we call it that is that we use the 3Q method to activate spiritual intelligence. And the 3Q method works almost instantly to shift you from ego to soul, which is what activates spiritual intelligence. But before we do the 3Q method together, I want to just spend a few minutes talking about the human operating system. So to help me describe that, I want to show you an article I wrote about the human operating system called The Twin Poles of Attention. So let me just get that article up on the screen. I think you should be seeing it now. The Twin Poles of Attention. So this represents the human operating system. Now I want to read a little bit from this article. By the way, you'll find the article on the website sqi.co. So the human operating system, or for short HOS, is comprised of the twin poles of attention, representing the subject pole and the object pole of attention. As everyone can confirm from their own experience, at the object pole of attention is everything we're aware of, from perceptions of external surroundings to thoughts, emotions, beliefs, memories, self-image, personal history, etc. The ego is experienced as identity with states of body and mind at the object pole of attention. In other words, identify with your body and mind, that's called being the ego. And that's when you're defining yourself in terms of whatever thoughts and emotions you're having at that moment. At the subject pole of attention is consciousness itself, otherwise known as the soul. So when you identify with consciousness itself, that's being the soul. To identify with the subject pole of attention is simply to be the presence of awareness, or simply to be that which is aware. The subject pole of attention is free from modification by anything at the object pole. Therefore, the qualities of consciousness itself, or the soul, represent source energy in its inherent unmodified form, as experienced at the subject pole of attention in moments of presence, in the form of peace, compassion, joy, love, wisdom, and creativity. From ego to soul, the shift from the object pole to the subject pole of attention replaces the ego with the soul, which establishes the state of presence and thus activates spiritual intelligence. When spiritual intelligence is not active, IQ and EQ are exercised by the ego. But when spiritual intelligence is activated, IQ and EQ are exercised by the soul. So that's they're brief extracts from this article called The Twin Poles of Attention. Now, I'd like to go on now to describing the 3Q method, and you can do it along with me so that we'll all get to experience how to activate our spiritual intelligence using this rapid 3Q method, which from ego to soul. So to help me describe this method, I want to show you a few more slides. So this symbol on the screen now represents three dimensions of intelligence: IQ, EQ, and SQ. And the symbol opens out into the twin poles of attention that we've just seen in that article. So at the object pole, as I've just said, is everything you're aware of, states of body and mind, and at the subject pole is consciousness itself. This represents the human operating system. You're either at the object pole as the ego or at the subject pole as the soul. The only exception to this is if you're using transcendental intelligence, which goes beyond spiritual intelligence and is prior to both poles of attention. And let me just show you another slide, which will build on the last slide. If I can find it here. Oh, here it is. So this next slide goes into a little bit more detail. So this slide here places it's the same as the last slide with the addition of two words, ego and soul. So as you can see, when you're identified with your thoughts and emotions, with states of body and mind, you're being the ego. But when you're identified with consciousness itself, which is aware of objects of attention, that's called being the soul. So as I've just said, this is the human operating system. Now, this human operating system came about from my study of psychology and spirituality. Before I developed this explanation of the human operating system, I'd spent 30 years studying psychology and spirituality, and I wanted to summarize my findings in a form that would be easily understood and in a form which was most useful to most people. And that's why I came up with the human operating system. So the human operating system represents the intersection between and spirituality. So what you see on the screen now combines psychology and spirituality into one unified model of our human operating system. Now, in order to activate spiritual intelligence, we need to shift from ego to soul. In other words, we need to shift from identifying with our thoughts and emotions to identifying with consciousness itself. So shifting from the object pole to the subject pole. Now, to do that, we need to go through this mechanism of attention, which is what connects ego and soul. Let's have a look how we do this. And this is called the 3Q method. And the 3Q method has three simple steps: notice, feel, and be. So in a moment, I'm going to describe these three steps so that you know exactly what you need to do to shift from ego to soul, from false self to true self, and therefore activate your spiritual intelligence. So this is called the 3Q method. 3Q combines IQ, EQ, and SQ. So step one is an IQ step, notice. And step one is the fact that this is our operating system, that we have an object pole of attention, which is what we're aware of, and we have a subject pole of attention, which is consciousness itself. So step one, notice, is simply about reminding ourselves that this is how we operate. We're either being the ego, identified with thoughts and emotions, or we're being the soul, identified with consciousness itself. which is what we are. So step one, which is notice, is simply reminding ourselves of this, because we so often forget, don't we? We just identify with our thoughts and emotions quite unconsciously, without realizing that's what we're doing, and we then define ourselves in terms of whatever thoughts and emotions we're having in that moment. You know, we say things like, I am sad, or I am anxious, instead of the truth, which is, I am aware of an emotion of sadness, or I am aware of an emotion of anxiety. That's the truth. But instead of that, we go, I am anxious, or I am sad. So we identify ourselves with our emotions. That's being the ego. So step one, which is notice, is just noticing this fact that we make this common error, that we identify with the emotion, which is a mistake because it's not the truth. In truth, we are consciousness. We are at the subject pole, even when we forget that that's the case. So it's important to remind ourselves of that before we move to step two. So step two is feel. And here's where we get to feel what it's like at the subject pole. And for this step, we use a breathing method. So I'll describe this breathing method, and you can do it along with me. So just bring your attention to your breathing now. Just notice at the end of the in-breath, there's a slight pause when you're neither breathing in or out. Just find that pause now. Did you find that pause in the breathing? It's a natural pause. You don't have to hold your breath. In fact, it's important not to hold your breath, because that will prevent you feeling what it's like in this pause. So just find that pause at the end of the in-breath when you're neither breathing in or breathing out. Did you find that pause? It's very brief, it's less than a second. It's definitely there if you look for it. Right? Did you find it? Okay, now feel what it feels like in that pause in the breathing. Feel what it feels like there. How does it feel for you in that pause at the end of the in-breath when you're neither breathing in or breathing out? How does it feel? It feels calm and peaceful, doesn't it? Yeah? Just check it out for yourself. Do you find it peaceful there? Now, the reason why it feels peaceful in that pause is that in that pause, the thinking mind also pauses. So when the breathing pauses, the thinking pauses. And of course, it's the thinking that introduces all the disturbance. So when the thinking pauses, you feel peaceful. So this is step two. This is how it feels at the subject pole of attention when you're consciously being simply awareness itself. But we have one further step to go, which is be. So let's get back to doing step two, feeling that peace at the end of the in-breath, and then I'll lead us into step three. So find that still point at the end of the in-breath and feel that peacefulness in that still point. peaceful feeling at the end of the in-breath, it's time to move to step 3, which is be. Be that peaceful feeling. Be that peaceful feeling simply means allow the peaceful feeling to go all over your body and mind. And now just take a look around. Just confirm for yourself that you are now being consciousness itself. You're being the field of consciousness. And within the field of consciousness, all sorts of objects can continue to arise, like thoughts and emotions and perceptions, but they're just objects of attention within the field of awareness. You're being the awareness itself. You're being the field of awareness itself. So you're no longer identified with your thoughts and emotions. You're now being the soul. Now, in this position, you have access to all the qualities and capabilities of spiritual intelligence. So not just peacefulness, but also compassion and joy and love and creativity naturally emerge when you're simply being consciousness itself. So everything that makes life worth living is available at the subject pole of attention without searching for it and without seeking it. It's simply there spontaneously when you shift from ego to soul. So this represents the end of seeking. When you're being the ego, you're constantly seeking for happiness, seeking for something meaningful. But when you shifted to the subject pole, end of seeking, because you spontaneously find everything that you were looking for when you were being the ego at the object pole. You find the source of peace and joy and love when you're being the soul at the subject pole. So you see, your spiritual intelligence represents the end of seeking. No more seeking is required. You can simply abide in that state of conscious happiness, free of the need to seek. So this is how we activate our spiritual intelligence. So I hope you can see these 3 steps are very simple, and you can do these 3 steps in association with any activity. You don't have to use the usual meditation techniques of sitting down in a quiet place and closing your eyes and battling with your thoughts for half an hour, No, you can directly go to the meditation space at the subject pole of attention using these 3 steps: notice, feel, and be. So this is how you activate your spiritual intelligence, which simply is the meditation space. And you can do this at any time, walking down the street, when you're talking to someone, when you're feeling reactive emotions, if you're feeling sad or anxious, you can simply use these 3 steps: notice, feel, and be, and shift from your ego reactions immediately into your soul condition, so that you feel the peace and joy and love of spiritual intelligence. So I do hope you'll experiment with this technique yourself whenever you remember to. And you'll find in the description above this video a link to the SQ website, where you'll find a longer video on this whole technique. If you look for an article called How to Experience Spiritual Intelligence, you'll find it on that website, sqi.co. So, of course, the reason why we meet together to do the 3Q method is so that we can all experience our spiritual intelligence together. When we meet together, then the power of spiritual intelligence is magnified, and we're able to experience it more easily. And we're also a more powerful force to share spiritual intelligence with collective human consciousness. So I do hope you'll join us next week at the same time, Wednesday at 12 noon, London time, London, UK, so we can all experience our spiritual intelligence together by navigating the human operating system from ego to soul. If you can't join us live, then you'll find the recording of the sessions on the SQ page, the Spiritual Intelligence page on Facebook. So I hope you can join us live next week at the same time. And until then, I'll say goodbye. Bye for now.